Go ahead and start recording. Welcome, everybody. So this is a reprise of our Eat, Paint, Live value seminar that I did in the spring, and then everybody was asking me to bring it back again. So here we are. So I know that some of you have done this seminar before, this workshop before. Raise your hand, or not your real hand, raise your hand if you've done this before, so I could see. Kathy, I think you haven't.
Yeah, I have. I can't find my hand.
That's okay. That's all right. I know you have. I remember. Yeah, Ginny, Shelley. Great. Okay.
Look what's behind you.
Say, Ginny.
Look behind you.
That's B. There she is. Little cameo. She always has to make a cameo. So this is, I've changed it up a little bit, but it's the same concepts. So what we're going to do is we're going to talk about today value in art. And we will do a couple of value studies. I know she's got to usurp me. She's got to be the star there. She's kicked out of her own room because the other cat's banished with the door closed. That's why she's just like walking around, doesn't know what to do with herself. Anyway, so we'll do a couple of value studies. So what you'll need for today is just one color of paint, preferably a darker one. It's easier to see the change in values if you use a darker paint. So not something real low in the chroma, not something like a yellow. Don't use yellow. Orange is hard. That kind of thing. Yeah, blue, brown, gray, black. Those are best for value studies. Hi to those of you who are coming in or coming in again. Hello. So we're going to talk about value in art today. So what I was saying is you need one color paint and something to mix it in, water, and one brush. That's really all you need. Maybe a pencil if you like. And when we talk about value in art, I'm not talking about, what I'm not talking about is how much is your art worth, or how much should I charge for art? How much should I pay for art? That's not what we're talking about today, right? We're talking about value as it pertains to color. So value is a quality of color or a characteristic of color. When people talk about color in art, you know, there's more than one definition of color because there's more than one aspect to color. So value is just one aspect. So I've got a PowerPoint for us. We will be painting as well, but we'll start with the PowerPoint because it's easier for me to explain when I have some visuals, right? We're all visual people. So can everybody see this PowerPoint here, this slide?
Yes.
Okay. So when we talk about value in art, all we're talking about is how light or dark a color is. And in fact, you can even think of value just as lightness. It might be easier for some people to just think of lightness, how much light. But the quality of light is something else we're always striving to capture. It's related to value, but it's not just about value. So that's why I refer to value as lightness or darkness. And that is relative, always relative. And it's measured on a scale where white is the highest value and black is the lowest value. So here is a simple value scale right here, with white as the highest scale and black as the lowest. And you can remember that by thinking to yourself, white is high, the sky is lighter, you know, and the sky is higher than the ground, and the ground is usually darker than the sky. So if that's easy for you to remember, you can use that little memory device. Okay. So value in art refers to how light or dark a color is relative to each other and regardless of color. Okay. Got some of the same pictures here and some are different. So value is pretty generally considered to be one of the most important variables to the success of your painting or any two-dimensional art project you're working on. So it could be photography, it could be pastel, it could be a drawing, a charcoal, any of those things. But value is considered to be more important even than your color selection. And when we talk about color selection, we're talking about the hue, the actual intrinsic color that you chose. So remember I said there were different qualities to color. You have value and you also have hue, and there are others as well. Hue is just the pure color. What color is it at its core? Is it pink? Is it purple? Is it blue? Is it yellow? Okay. So that I consider, and most artists consider, to be secondary to the value, the lights and the darkness in your painting. Okay. In fact, as illustrated here by a monochromatic painting, the hues, the colors that you choose have little to no importance when it comes to setting the structure, the actual structure of your painting. So I always like to say at the beginning, I'm not saying color isn't important. It has a very important role to play, especially when it comes to emotion and mood, and sometimes specifically needing to capture a specific hue. For example, if you're painting a, let's say, a pool ball, you know, a pool cue ball, you need it to be a certain color sometimes, or a stoplight. You need it to be a certain color in order for the viewer to understand that, you know, that pool cue isn't an apple, or it isn't a something else that's round, you know. And with the stoplight, it would be kind of the same thing. So when it comes to shapes or matching colors, or if you want to convey a certain kind of fruit, for example, a cantaloupe would be that specific pale kind of orange color, versus if it were green, it might look like exactly like a honeydew melon. So color can be important when it comes to identifying something that is widely recognizable in a painting. But if you take the color out of the equation, then it helps us to understand what value is, how important it is, and how to use it in your paintings. And most experienced artists will agree that value is more important than the color. It should come first when you're thinking about your painting. That's why when I teach, we always do value studies before we do color studies. Okay. So does everyone understand that, or does anyone disagree or have any questions before we move forward? We all love color, right? We're watercolorists. We love color. We're always buying new colors. We're playing with colors. That we're not saying color isn't important at all, but value is really necessary. And I think it's easy to see that when you turn a painting into a monochromatic study, or just a monochromatic version, that you can have a successful painting without having color in it at all. It can just be one color or no color in the case of a grayscale. So why do we need value? Because it sets a structure for our paintings. So, well, let's talk about structure first before we go forward. So when we're painting something or drawing something or doing anything two-dimensional, what we are usually doing, we're not talking about abstract art, but what we're usually doing when we're trying to represent something is, and I've said this before, but I think it bears repeating, we are taking a three-dimensional subject in front of us, whether it's a still life of a flower vase, a bowl of fruit, a person that we're painting, a vista, a landscape. Those are three-dimensional. There's depth in them, and they're not flat, right? They're actual three dimensions. But when we're painting that, we're taking that and we're translating that to a two-dimensional piece of paper. And what we're doing on that two-dimensional piece of paper is we are trying to create the feel that there are three dimensions, right? Usually, we're not flattening things out. If you're a cartoonist, you might be doing that, or if you're just purely working in abstract, you might be doing that. But even abstract artists, they know what they're doing, and they know how to abstract something and still make a convincing painting if they want to, that there is some representation of structure in that painting. So, and I'm not talking necessarily about composition. I'm talking about the feeling that you've captured something three-dimensional. Mm-hmm. So whether it's a gate you can walk through, or an archway like here, or a building, or anything, a 3D form, a three-dimensional form, for example, all the roundness of a bowl of fruit, for example. That's what we're trying to do on that piece of paper. So we're trying to take a 3D subject in front of us, flatten it onto 2D, but still fool your eye into thinking that you're looking at something that's three-dimensional, right? And when you think about photo representational artists, those artists are the ones who are the best at doing it, and who, that's where I think for us as maybe beginner or intermediate artists, we can really see that happening, where you look at a painting and you go, is that like a photo or is that real? And you can't tell because the artist has done such a good job at recreating whatever they're looking at. And you don't know what you're looking at. Is it three-dimensional or is it just the illusion of 3 dimensions? So you can't do that without value. It's not possible. You can't create a 3-dimensional object on 2 dimensions without having value come into play, whether you know it or not. So that's why we're going to talk about what it is. So it is a very important tool in terms of getting the form right in your painting, but also in terms of structuring your painting so it's visually interesting and you're telling your viewer where to look. So for example, here, the viewer's eye, our eye as a viewer, is naturally going to be drawn to areas of high contrast, areas where there is a higher value, like this white flower, set against a backdrop of a darker value, the background. So there's midtones and darks here, but the white of the flower, I think we can all agree, is where our eye goes first in this painting. And then secondly, it probably goes either to the lily pads right in front or to that palm tree reflection. Because even though that's not white, it's still a high contrast area because it's very dark. The palm tree is very dark against a fairly light background. Would you guys agree? Yes. Okay. Anyone disagree with that? Okay.
My eye went immediately to the palm tree and worked its way up.
Yeah, that's good
Began
too.
to recognize things. Yeah, recognize the lily pads, which was what the next value, and then I saw the flower.
Yeah, good
So it's
call.
like,
Who's saying that? Is that
Marcia?
Marcia? Thank you, Marcia. So I think I would agree with you. I mean, I tend to go to areas where there's pops of white, but the white of the flower does have a high value, low value mix surrounding it with the darks and lights on the lily pads. Whereas it's much more of a stark contrast with the palm tree. And also there's just less going on around it. You know, it's kind of isolated there. So yeah, I agree. Those are 2 areas of super high contrast. Yeah, Diane.
It may also be because the palm trees are pointing up, and so the reflection's pointing up, so that leads your eye upwards as well.
Exactly. It's like an arrow.
Right. Yeah, it is. Yeah. Several arrows.
And then you discover that first flower, and then you sort of discover, I think your eye moves around and sees the other flowers, because it's a combination of composition and value in this and shape. So yeah, those strong verticals, I think, do help move the eye upward. Yeah.
It causes your eye to go up and down, actually.
Absolutely, which is great in a painting. You want the eye to move around. So yeah, that's a good point. And value never works alone, right? A good artist is always considering all the different elements that make a great painting. So yeah, good point. So value is the tool that we use to depict light and shadow in our paintings, and in this case, in the photographs. So the whole point really of using value is to create the illusion of light. You can't actually have light in your painting. There's no light source. So you have to create it. And by creating the light, you give form to objects that you are depicting. So we all know this, but thinking about cohesively, I think, helps a bit. We all intrinsically know this, that when you light an object, it will have a highlight on it, it will have a midtone on it, and it will have a shadow on it. And also it will usually cast a shadow as well. So light gives form to those because the light shines in different places, but also creates the curves and angles of the objects that you are depicting. Highlights is only one aspect. A lot of the time we think about highlights, but we don't think about the midtones, and we don't think about the core shadows. I think for most of us, we're simplifying things. We are, as beginners, you might be flattening something. So you may always probably think of a cast shadow. Let me make sure I have a cast shadow in my painting, so it doesn't look like it's levitating, whatever that thing is. But the flip side, the counterpoint to that, is the highlight. So the highlight is where the light is hitting Can anyone tell me where the light source is in this picture here?
It's a window, right?
It's a window, correct. The light is coming through the window. Yeah.
So
Very natural.
his face is lit, and the globe is lit, and the table is lit, and then you see the shadows from the bookcase behind him.
Correct. So what you've got is highlights are hitting generally when there is a case of natural light, like it is here, and there's probably no other light because this picture was done before artificial lights, I think is what it's depicting. So you've got it hitting the window side, the right side, and the tops of those objects, like Marcia said. And then what you're seeing the most is that the shadows are on the underside and the back. So the shadows are hitting, the shadows are in the places where the light cannot reach, correct? That's all something I think we, again, understand, but we sometimes forget how to do that, or we might have a complicated light source, or we might not think about where to put the light source in our picture. Okay, so here's one that might be a little bit harder. It's just a banana sitting on a white surface. So can you guys identify where the light source is here? There may be more than one.
Isn't it from above?
From above.
Yeah, so generally we're going to have things that are lit from above in general, but you can also think, is it above straight down? Is it above to the right or to the left? This one looks like
looking at it from here, it'd be to the left, from my point of view anyway, to the left.
I was gonna say a little to the
Comes in
right.
this way.
So let me annotate. So we've got, hey, that's not what I meant to do. Okay, so we've got here in the annotation, we've got
Yeah,
the brightest part,
right.
correct?
Yes, right there.
But
And underneath.
And on the right.
And on the
underneath
right.
and to the right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right there, yeah. And then a little bit over there. Now
You guys see this too?
Mhm.
Yeah, is that reflective light
Yeah,
that we're seeing on
exactly.
the lower?
So that's where things get confusing. Yep, good point. Who said that? Because it's a great comment.
Marcia said it.
Marcia again. Good job, Marcia.
I've been
So-
studying this for 11 years, and I think I'm finally might be getting some of it.
Good. Keep contributing. Yeah. So we clearly have a light source coming from here. But when you have a very reflective surface, you can quite often have a lot of bounced light. The light will bounce. And it's bouncing off of that surface. Like if this is truly a white table that this is banana sitting on, which I think it is, because here's your shadow, right? This is your cast shadow. So the light is bouncing off and reflecting back up on the bottoms of items, in this case, the banana. So, and you also have the light hitting right here at that facet of the banana, right before the downturn, where this is all in shade. Okay. So number one, this is hard to see because we're not 100% sure if it's bounce light or is there a secondary light source coming from here? I tend to think not because there's also a highlight here. But it could be because the shadow is maybe leaning a little bit this way. So I'm exaggerating it, but it's a little bit. So it's hard to tell. But I think in general, we've got the idea. And if you had like, instead of painting this exactly, if you wanted to paint this in a more simplified way, what you could do is you could leave the upper light source and you could have very little bounce light, or you could just have bounce light on one part of it, right? But so it's not so easy. But what is important is to think about the light source because that's what we forget. So we might do a cast shadow, but we might forget highlights. And for example, this highlight really here, right here, is pretty, I would say, integral in getting the feel of a banana, that facet to the banana. Otherwise, it doesn't look like a real banana. It will look too rounded. So let me get rid of these. I'm trying to undo this. Okay. Thank you. Sorry. Thanks for bearing with. Didn't want to do that. So to go back to here, you will have sometimes a very clear light source, sometimes not so clear. Very important to think to yourself, where is my light source coming from, so that you can give that illusion of volume and also depth and light. And value can also help you create a mood and an atmosphere, which we'll talk about a little bit later. But here's a value study, or actually this was a color study that I turned into black and white, but where there is no clear value definition. And they can be, paintings without clear value definition can be confusing, but they can, and that's at best. At worst, they can mislead you because you don't know at all what you're looking at, or you might think you're looking at something different. So here it is in color. So in this case, I wasn't making a painting. I was making a color study with a little bit of composition, but I wasn't thinking too much about value. But had I been, I think it would have been a failure. Color-wise, very nice. Value-wise, what are we looking at here? It's very hard to tell. So when an artist doesn't properly consider value or doesn't do a good job with the value definition, then you have to make up for it with line and color and even watercolor technique. And sometimes that's successful and sometimes it isn't. So when I look back on my paintings and I think about a lot of paintings of mine that didn't work, I know why they didn't work. Usually for me, it's either composition or value. It's not usually color. I have a pretty good sense of that. So it's either composition or value. Lately, it's value, because my composition I've been working on, and my value I have, it takes longer. It's harder for me anyway. And so I can see those old paintings and I can see where I've tried to make up for the lack of value by adding in more detail, for example, to try to draw an eye there, which can sometimes work because detail can add a value to the painting. But sometimes you're putting the detail in the wrong place, and so it really doesn't work. So yeah, we can have a great sense of color. Color is really useful. It brings emotion to the painting, but using color or technique alone won't create a strong enough painting. It won't serve you, because color and value are intrinsically related, but we can be drawn to really beautiful colors without having them represent the values that we're looking to represent. Does that make sense? And has anyone experienced that? Yeah. Anyone have an example? Something that went awry or?
Oh, I have lots of things that have gone awry.
Yeah.
I was going to say the same thing.
Too long of a class to log all that out.
Yeah, but I think, like, in color, this is very different than it was in black and white. In black and white, it seemed to me to have more power than it does in color.
That's a good point. Yeah. The reason for that is, I think, because these colors are all pure hues for the most part. So you've got really bright colors. None of them are taken down a notch. Like there's not a lot of browns and grays going on. So if you're a color person, you might love this painting. But if you go back and look at it in black and white, the value definition is strong enough that it stands the test. And there's actually less, I guess, less distraction of color. That's why we love Ansel Adams.
Yeah, distraction.
Yeah, distraction of color.
Distraction. That's a good, I've never heard that before.
Yeah. I mean, we love black and white paintings, right? But raise your hand if you've got a lot of black and white photographs. Raise your hand if you've got black and white photography around your house. Few of us do, but a lot of us don't. So it's just
the only thing I have around my house is my own paintings.
Are any of them monochromatic?
Nope. And I do have some other art. Oh, I have two black and white etchings that are really nice that a friend of my husband's family drew, but no, I don't do monochromatic.
Yeah,
much.
see, so it's really.
I'm excited to do it today.
Good. Okay, I see that Jennifer had her hand up, and then Diane. So I'll come to Jennifer first.
You know what? I kind of forgot it in this conversation, but the previous slide that you had with the color, and it mentioned number 4. I missed the beginning of what you were talking about. So I was just trying to catch up a little bit. But the sorry.
Because color and value are intrinsically related. So we're about to cover that. We just didn't get to it yet.
Okay.
Yep, that's the lead. Thank you. And Diane?
All right, thanks.
Thanks, Jennifer.
I had decided I was going to do a photo holiday card this year, and I was trying to print them in color because they're so beautiful in color. And I decided to switch them to black and white. So and they look so dramatic in black and white, even though they look beautiful in color. And I was painting postcards last night from a trip we took this week up to Cambria, and I just took a photo of one of them and switched it to black and white, and just to test to see, did I get it?
Yeah, that's great. Yep, that's one way to do it. And we'll talk about that just in a little bit. Yeah, I think so many of us are drawn to watercolor because of the brightness of the colors, the beauty of the colors, and the color play. But I know a lot of people who just do black and white photography. I can think of like 3 very good friends of mine who are artists who do black and white photography, and they never introduce color. And so they see value as a primary. Obviously, they're not distracted by color at all. And it's bringing it down to more of a pureness, I suppose. But if you do like color, like me, it's probably why you're here, part of the reason why, then it's important to understand that color and value are tied together. So even though we've been talking about them separately, they can't really be separated. So if you're painting in color, every color has a value that is underlying, and it's somewhere between white and black. And I can show you this the best on a color wheel. So we're all familiar with the color wheel. I've also got a real color wheel ahead. So you guys can put your hands down after you get to go, by the way. So everybody should have a color wheel at home. They're super handy. I have a couple because I have this little travel one, which is great. We're all familiar with the color wheel. And when you look at the color wheel, it looks like you have a variety of options of hues to choose from. But when you change that color wheel to take out the color and you just change it either to a grayscale or in this case, a sepia scale, what you'll see is that here's the color wheel with color taken out of it. I'll ask you guys, what do you see when you look at this? Some of you guys have done this workshop before, so you might know the answer.
A lot of high, a lot of low.
A lot of low values, correct. Is that Marcia who said that?
Yeah, who said, I have to kind of sit back and look at it. Again, I don't see it that way.
It's so crazy, isn't it? Like all this variety. Look how little variety there is. Your yellows up here and that light green, those are, more high key, but then the whole entire bottom half and more of the color wheel are essentially all the same value. There is very little difference between those colors when you see them this way. So what does that mean for the painting? That means if you're doing a painting, you might use a lot of different colors, but they don't have different values. So in terms of light and dark, not all colors are created equal. Straight out of the tube hues without adding white or without diluting them in the case of watercolor, because that's what we do, or without adding grays or making a mix that has a gray, like using a complement, for example, or without adding black to darken that color up, will give you very little value differentiation. So what that means is if you're only thinking about color, you're only considering it, and you're not considering value, you are going to have a painting that lacks structure. Now, if you don't care about structure and you're painting in an abstract way, or it's more important to you to have the color interaction, you can create very sophisticated paintings that way. But in general, if you're trying to create a sense of depth, light, etc., you're not going to get that. You're going to get a sense of emotion from using purples, blues, and reds together, but you won't get a lot of sense of depth. So For each of your individual hues on the color wheel, you can create a value scale. You can go all the way from white to black. And in watercolor, white is the white of the paper. We basically just leave the paper alone when we're painting on white paper, right? And then using your consistencies. So you guys have all taken my classes, consistencies, going from your wateriest mixture of tea to milk, being a thicker mixture, to cream and honey being your thickest. Those are going to give you a value scale. And in watercolor, the dark colors lend themselves to this exercise. That's why I said to take a dark color, because already straight out of the tube, they're quite dark. Like this is probably an indigo here. And just by adding water and not having to add any gray paint or white paint or adding a complement, you're able to just thin this darker paint out and create that value scale. Creating a value scale with all of your colors is an excellent exercise that we are not going to do today, but you guys might be kind of curious to do that on your own. So I would recommend it. Take your regular palette that you use, your regular palette of colors, and take a big piece of paper and create a grid system. And for each of those colors, go from straight from the tube and then thin it out until you get to the white of the paper. So you're going to do, you know, even more variations than going from honey to cream to milk to coffee to tea, but try to spread it out as much as possible. And you'll see it's quite interesting. You can see with some of those colors, for example, in the lighter colors like yellows and oranges, you may see, or even some of your lighter browns and such, that it's almost impossible for you to get a very dark value out of them. And that's where you'll see to yourself, you'll need to add a dark to create a dark with that. Again, with watercolor, you never need to add white. You can just thin it out. But if we were working or talking about oil painting, or anybody here who works in mixed media, then you'll know you have to add white to get to those lighter colors because they don't thin out necessarily with water. That's not what you're going to do in that. So here's something else.
Can I ask a quick question?
Oh yeah, yes.
I also do Jean Haines. I don't know if you know she is, but she uses a lot of gouache. And I take Mike Daniels' class, and he's saying that the use of gouache is becoming more popular or more acceptable. So, you know, I have added gouache after something and to kind of lighten it up if I thought it was too dark. I mean, of course, you can lift and you can scrub and you can do all kinds of things. But I have added gouache, or I have titanium white. I don't like to use that because it'll make it too opaque. But
so gouache. That's the problem. Gouache does too.
Yeah, and one of the women in our class said she did a Christmas card. When she went to take a picture of it, the gouache was shiny, you know, where she had done it. So she couldn't make it into a Christmas card. But I have used it, and you know, you're saying as a lightener. It's not my first choice. It's usually a fix.
Yeah, exactly. Marcia's right. So yeah, I'm not against gouache. I like it as a separate medium. I don't like to mix my watercolor and gouache because I love the transparency, and gouache by nature, by definition, is an opaque watercolor. So it's basically the same as our watercolor pigments that we use now, but there's more filler that's added to give it opacity. And it's also called body pigment or body color. And that's because it has more body to it. It has more filler to it. That's what it means when you hear body color. Body color is kind of an old fashioned term, but you'll hear that. And it's great for fixes like Marcia said, but also, I mean, I use it, but I'll use it for final little opaque marks on top of darks. And I'll show you how I did it in something later if we have time, but I'm not happy with how it turned out because it's never as white as the white of the paper. And you have to use it last because it is not transparent. So if you tried to, like, if you use it to lighten a color, for example, let's say you have an indigo and you want to have a powder blue. If you use that, you're going to have a very opaque color and you will not be able to layer anything really over it. It's pretty hard to do that. So it's best to save those opaque marks for the final marks. or for like a very dark background. It's hard to achieve dark backgrounds in watercolor or to do a night scene or something like that. So that's generally what I use it for. Like I said, I'm not against it, but I always am thinking about how to keep that transparency and lightness in my painting, because that's why I like watercolor. That's just me. There are plenty of artists out there who, like Mike Daniels and others, who use them together and who also use just gouache and use them in such beautiful ways. I know a few artists who water down their gouaches so they are fairly transparent, and they use them and you look and you go, is that watercolor or is that gouache? And it's hard to tell. They do it very well. But for me, I'm on the other side of the coin. I'm on the flip side. I'm always trying to keep things light and bright. And that's just a style, personal style. Yeah, that's a good point though. So anyway, let's talk about this color wheel for a second, because we all, I think, know about the color mixing side of the color wheel, which is this side, which shows, you know, if you add a complement or you add the tertiary color, what do you get? That's what this side of the color wheel does. But this side of the color wheel shows you how to change the values of your color. So by adding a tint, tone, or shade. So for example, we'll just pick this yellow. So when you add a tint, when you create a tint, that's by adding white. So what we were just talking about, if you add white to a color, you get the tint of that color. If you add gray, you get a tonal version of that color. That's where the word tone comes in, or tonal study is a grayscale study. And if you add shade, that's black. If you want a shade of that color, so it's tint, tone, shade, the addition of white, gray, black. And unless you're super adept at color mixing, you might not realize that adding black to a yellow will give you green. You might think it gives you a darker yellow, but it doesn't necessarily. So this is a good way to figure it out until you've kind of figured it out on your own. And that just takes time. And that's why also creating that value scale is a great exercise, because you're going to see if you can't get to some of those darks on some of your colors, that then you can play with it and see what happens when you add gray and when you add black to those colors. Okay. So again, just to reiterate, so many of those pure colors on the color wheel have similar values, even though the hue is different. And when you put the colors next to each other, they might have color contrast, which is great, but they might not have enough value contrast. And your eye might have some difficulty identifying which color has more importance in the painting. So if you have a lot of bright colors all over the place of the same value, where does the viewer know to look? They might not know where they're supposed to look. Okay. And I'm sure that another way to illustrate this is to think about colorized photographs. We've all seen that colorized photograph where it's black and white, but then that little red dot in it that's where we go to look, right? So the same thing can be done in a colorful painting, just by having a value contrast. Okay. So let's talk about value scales for a second. So there obviously are not just a few values, just like there aren't just a few consistencies. You can have an infinite number of values in between that 1 and the 10. So start as simply as you need to start when you're thinking about value. 10 may be too many. I like to use an odd number. So a lot of the time when I am doing a value study, or I'm examining a painting and looking to see what the values are in the painting or in a photograph that I want to translate, I like an odd number. I like 3 or 5. 3 is great for beginners, but a lot of the time we have to train our eyes to see the differences in value. And so if you've got a painting with an infinite number of values and you're trying to kind of recreate that in a value study, just using 3 can be hard, because you have to take all your darks and make them 3, and then you have to take the white of the paper as 1, so everything else lands in the middle. That can be very hard. I think having 5 is a good place to start, because it's an odd number and all the colors in your painting can sort of start on the mid-tone, and then you can ask yourself, based on that mid-tone, is the value of that color that you're seeing, is it lighter than the midtone or is it darker than the midtone? Okay. Does that make sense, everyone? Okay. And having an odd number is very helpful. So in this case, we've got 1 of the black, we've got the 5 of the white paper, and then we've got 3 in between that are, I think, fairly easy to see the differences in. Okay. Now, how do you translate that to real life? So you can create a value scale of your own. You can print them from the internet. You can buy one from a print store, art store. Like I have that grayscale one. They're all great reference tools. So here's one. And it's got all of my low values on this side, all of my high values on this side. And we'll talk about why this is arranged like this rather than in a long line. I'll tell you that in a second. But I'll share my screen and I'll show you how I utilize this. So, for example, if you're analyzing your painting and you want to make sure that you've got the darks correct, what you do is you take the value finder and you line that up to the values in your painting. This is probably a bad one as an example. Let me get a different one. Here we go. No, that probably isn't great either. I marked my paper. I just forgot where it is. Oh, here we go. So what I can do is try to line this up. And you can see that these colors are pretty close. So if I were using just these 5 values in my painting, I can match up and I can say, okay, this is going to be my lightest value, right? And then a darker value might be here, and you can see if you can match it up. It's closer to this one. So that's why there's a hole in here, because it makes it easier to see the value match. But you don't need to have those holes clipped. You can just literally line it up along the edge. There's my blacks. Does that make sense? And does everybody have one of these? So this is useful when you're creating a value study, but also when you're just looking at a photograph. So if you print out a black and white version, like Diane was saying, she turned her, photo, recently taken photo into black and white. You can print it out and you can match it up to the values. And then you can say to yourself, okay, I'm going to match the values of white of the paper, my darkest dark. And then let's say you're just going to use these 2 and these 2. I'm just picking them, right? But then you can match those up to the different elements in the painting that you're going to be making. So
I haven't done it, but my understanding is on your iPhone, you can take a picture of your painting and then turn it to a black and white picture.
Yeah, I'm going to show you guys how to do that in just a moment. But again,
okay,
thank you, Marcia. And I'll get to you in just one second, Valley. If we can use our hands, that really helps a lot, because I don't always know who's talking. But I got you now, Marcia. Valley, I'll come to you in just a second. But even when you have created a notan or a value study in a photograph, you still might need to match your own colors up, the colors that you're planning to paint in, right? You might need to match them up to this value scale. So that's why it's really important to have one handy. Valley, question or comment?
So maybe this is obvious. So you're saying that every painting should have different values in it, because otherwise it's not interesting.
Correct.
I mean, it's not, your eye does not know where to look. Okay.
Correct. So you may, to a degree, be able to make up for that with other elements in the painting. A strong composition, strong colors, and technique, detail. But without value, there might be something that's missing.
Thank you.
Yes, you're welcome. Yeah, thank you for pointing that out. Okay, Vicky.
Yeah, I guess I'm not following. I'm understanding value, but I don't understand the little card.
How do you use it?
Do that? Yeah, is that you would do a value study before you did your painting?
Correct.
Is that
yeah.
the idea?
Yeah, either do a value study before you do your painting, or when you print out a black and white picture, you can match up the black and white photo this will be like your photo subject. You match it up to these values, and then you can just do a color study and make sure that the colors you want to use correspond with this.
Okay.
I'll show you how to do it in
I'm-
just a minute.
yeah.
I know there's another step, so that's why.
There's
But-
another step. Okay.
Right. So the first
you.
step is being able to see value, being able to recognize it. The second step will be recreating it with color, which is harder. So for the first step is seeing it and seeing which values are in the actual photo that you're looking at or in the subject that's in front of you. Okay, then the next step will be recreating it. So it makes sense if you're not 100% there with me yet. We'll get there, don't worry. Does anybody else have any questions? Okay. Saw somebody put something in the chat, so I'm going to take a look. Oh, Kara, thank you. You answered my question for having a value scale when you're out painting. Yes, and also I'm going to talk about using a value finder when you're out painting as well. I wanted to put, when you guys asked me for the tip jar, I just put it in the chat, so thank you. Wanted to put that in there. Okay, so when you're out and about, let's skip that. When you're out and about, you can use a value scale. So I'm just gonna skip to this because it was mentioned in the chat. So when you have a scene or a tableau in front of you and you don't have maybe necessarily the ability to print something out, you can use a value finder. And a lot of companies, they combine a viewfinder with a composition tool. They combine that with a value device. So here's one right here. Let me stop. This is called the Tom Lynch Secret Composition Tool, but I use it less for composition and more for value. So you can look at what's in front of you, and you see the grid lines on this? I know it might be hard to see because it's kind of dirty, but you can, you've got grid lines that are separated into thirds. So you can use this to find a pleasing composition in front of you. A lot of the time when we're outside, it's also beautiful, right? It all just looks amazing, and it can be breathtaking and overwhelming. It doesn't mean it's going to make a great painting. It's like that big ocean in front of you. You know, we might be awed by it, but if you took a photo or if you did a painting of it, it's just going to be boring. So how can you sort of locate a focal point and more of an interesting composition? And a lot of the time also we're dazzled by the colors in front of us. So these composition tools have a red film. You can create one of these on your own too, if you're handy. But you basically, the red film takes the color out of the equation. So what you're seeing through it is the black and whites and grays. Okay. This is extremely helpful when you are looking at some very monochromatic scene in front of you. So if you go paint in the morning and everything is sort of that hazy, misty blue, gray, green, then it's very hard to see where your values are. This will help you because it neutralizes all the colors. So I highly recommend buying or making one of these. Can't tell you how many times. It's called the Tom Lynch Secret Composition Tool. I'll put it in the chat.
This is Marcia. I want to say, just holding it up, we could see the sample out of your drapes and your window. You know,
exactly.
I could see it there.
And there's not like a ton of color there either, but you can kind of see how it does work. And look at that. Ooh, you could really see the value differentiation. Yeah, it's great. It's a great tool to have. If you don't have that, you can use your eyes. So what you can do is squint, I would say, or failing that, try to locate a stronger light source. So outside, that might mean moving a little bit. You may be in a place where you're getting sunblind and it's not helping you. Inside, it could be turning on more lights, turning off other lights, which will help clarify where the darks and lights are in your field of view. Okay. So thank you for mentioning that, Kara. That's great. So we talked a little bit about that. So let's talk about how to improve your understanding of value. So the easiest way to do it is, like with this tool, is to take the color out of the equation. And that's why value studies are so helpful. Utilizing a value study, so painting in one color, or using other tools to create a value study, is super helpful. So some people draw in charcoal or graphite, just using one color. We use watercolor. Watercolor is such an easy way to create a value study because you can very quickly thicken up or thin out the color. In cases like this, sometimes I will just use pens. So I wanted to share with you guys what these pens are. They're Faber-Castell pens. And I'll show them to you. I've got them right here. It's a little set. You can get them at Staples or anywhere. And what you get in here is you get 3 colors. There are 6 pens. You get 3 warm grays and 3 cool grays. Marcia, yes. You had a question, Marcia?
I got distracted. You were talking about the red and you said squinting. I forgot.
No, okay.
I got carried away with looking at the pens, and then I forgot what I was going to ask. Oh, well, okay. It'll come back.
If it comes back, yeah. If it comes back, just shout it out. So we've got 3 cool grays and 3 warm grays. You can use them in conjunction if you want to, or you can just use them alone. And with the white of the paper, this will give you 4 values to work with. If you add a black magic marker, like a black Sharpie, then you've got 5 values, right? The 5 values which we were talking about. And you can start with that middle value. And yep, I'll be right a second. So you start with that middle value, then this will be your middle. Sorry, here. And you'll have the middle value. You'll have your 2 on either side of it, and you'll have your black Sharpie and the white of the paper. So these are really, really useful in creating value studies. And if you also struggle with temperature, then these can be helpful too. Temperature is a whole other subject, but generally when I'm doing my value studies, I just grab the 3 of the warm or the 3 of the cool. And I just use those in conjunction with the dark black marker and the white of my paper, and I can do a value study so easily. You guys might like to get those. Marcia, you remember?
Okay, yes, I remember. Okay. You were talking about the milk to the honey, the what did you call it?
Consistency of the paint. Mm-hmm.
The what?
Consistency.
The word? Consistency of the paint.
Yes.
But also, can't you do layering?
Yeah, you
layer
can.
over to get yourself darker and darker and darker. Because sometimes I'll do something, and then I recognize with my eyes squinting. That's my other teachers always recommend squinting. I'll see that it's not dark enough, so I'll layer it, and sometimes thicken the consistency. But layering sometimes helps me get the darkers I want.
Yeah, layering is great. That's a great tip, Marcia. Thank you. Because if you're working not in watercolor, let's say your pencil, there's a couple ways to get darker values in pencil. You could either press harder or press more lightly to get the different values, or you can shade or crosshatch, right? So a ballpoint pen, for example, you can't make it that much darker by pressing it. But if you're out and all you have is a ballpoint pen and you want to do a value study, then all you do is crosshatch, and crosshatch is the same thing Marcia's talking about. It's just layering. So if you do one direction of crosshatch, that will give you a lighter value. Then you've got the white of the paper, right? Then if you cross over it in another direction, essentially you're layering that same value, you're layering it again, and you're going to get a darker value. And if you do it in a third direction, you're getting an even darker value, right? Makes sense. So there's all different tools that we can use. You just have to get handy. Sometimes it's just down to what do I have on me at the moment, right? Or for me, I'm lazy, and do I have to get up, or can I just stay seated and do it? So we talk about value studies. The original, or OG value study, as I call it, is the Notan. Notan is just the Japanese word for light dark harmony. And the original value study is just black and white. So it's simplifying the values down to just 2 values, a black value and a white value. And the white is your paper. So that really just means all you need is any implement of expression, a pen, a pencil, paint, whatever it is, in just one color to make this value study. That's called the Notan. So if you look at this Monet picture above in full color, it's beautiful colors, right? But when you take the color out of it, you have less emotion to it. You don't get maybe that it's a sunset. It could be something else. Could be moonlight on the water or something. But what you do get is you know exactly what Monet wanted the viewer to look at. He wanted the viewer to look at that keyhole, because it is the area of biggest contrast. It is the white against black. And there aren't a lot of little details like the waves to confuse you. Now those draw your eyes in and up and around the painting, and that's great. But I think we can all agree that's a very successful composition, because, and that's another way to check your composition, is to just, you know, remove a lot of value from it and remove a lot of color from it. And then you can look at it and just say purely compositionally, does that work? Yes, it does. Okay. If you look at the color version, there aren't just two values. This isn't just black and white or even two values of one color. There's a lot of different values in there, but the No10 will help you remember where to keep the focus, where your darkest dark should be and where your lightest light should be. Does that make sense to everybody? Okay, so No10izer, which is something I think a lot of us are familiar with, is an app that you can buy in the App Store. So let's see if I can pull it up here. Here it is. Oh, I just had it and then it went away. So let's put it back. So the No10izer costs $1.99. I think it's well worth it. Here it is. So I'll show it to you on a screen share, and you guys might want to get it. Where is it? Here we go. So what you have is you turn any photograph into a value study, and on the No10izer you can do a pure No10 like here, which is just what we looked at with the Monet, just black and white, or you can do more values here. So you can add a third value, a fourth value, a fifth value. You can go up to 10 values on this app called the No10izer. So it's a very inexpensive and easy way to start learning how to see values in your photographs and also in your art. Another way to do it is you just do it yourself. So for example, if I'm painting a painting, and I'm going to just find one in here. Here's one. So I'm painting a painting and I'm not sure if I have enough value differentiation in this painting yet. This was just the study of a tree. So a way that I can tell is, and this goes back to your question, Vicki, is laying this over here. I may not be sophisticated enough yet to see how color and value match up, right? I might not be sure if this is close enough, or if, you know, I don't know quite where it is. However, if I take a picture of it, which I'm going to do right now, and then go to that photo and edit it, I can turn, anyone has this in their photo editing software. I have to wear my glasses, sorry. You can turn this into black and white. You just use the filters. And so now I can see there are 3 black and white filters. And I think mono is the closest to what you actually see on the paper, okay? So here I can see, and then what you can see that it's laid next to this. You can see now how easy it would be to make sure that I'm using a strong enough value contrast where I want them, and I can match them up here, right? You can also print this if you want to do it. Print out your black and white picture of your painting that is in progress. And that's how you can say to yourself, okay, do I need to add darker dark? So by looking at this, I might see that right here, that there might be a color contrast from the foliage to the dark shadows on the trees, but there isn't a value contrast. This and this are way too similar. So I'm not getting that, and I know it's kind of hard to see, so maybe I should stop this, show you here. So let me go back to myself. You can see that the dark shadow on the tree and the foliage is very similar. I'm not getting a lot of contrast. So in that case, I can darken one. I can decide, okay, now my painting's not done yet. I can darken the shadow on this tree, or I can darken the leaves in the background up. A third choice would be I can lighten it up. I can lift some of the color out, for example. Okay. So if you're not thinking about value, what you might be thinking about instead is, I need to change the color back there because the color is too similar. Something's not right. So I might think it's the color, but it's not really the color. That's too close. It's the value. Okay. But I think we've all fallen prey to this, where we say something's not right in this picture. And you might be thinking it's too samey, but you don't know why. So maybe I need to add more detail to that trunk, or maybe I need to add more color to those leaves, or change the color. And that's not necessarily going to be your best choice, and nor is it your only choice. So that's good to know. You can change the value. You can manipulate it. A lot of artists take black and white photos of their work as they're working on it, especially when they're nearing the end stages. And they can look at it and say, does it need another dark? Okay. And I think, like some of you, I am still a little afraid of the dark. It can be tough. You're going along and you're working on a painting and it looks great. You're liking how the techniques worked out. You didn't mess it up just yet. And you're afraid to add those final darks to it because you're afraid you might ruin it, right? How many of us has this happened to? Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's really common. So, Kara, you go. Did you just raise your hand to say yes, or you wanted to share?
I raised my hand to say I have a problem getting dark in my painting when you ask the question.
Oh, we can't really hear you. I can anyway. It's coming out kind of garbled. Okay, I'm sorry. We can't really hear. If you get that right, raise your hand again. I'll come back to you. But I wanted to share this example with you guys. So in this example, I have just used 3 values here. And I did paint this yellow here because I forgot to leave the shiny highlight at first. But I've used basically the white of the paper. Let's consider all these as one value. Then I've got a second value here and a third value you can see in these darks. There's nothing wrong with this painting, with this drawing, I would say, with this sketch. You know what it is, correct? It's just a lamp on a table throwing light. But if you look at this picture, and I just added another value, I added a darker value, and I added it very sparingly. So here at the bottoms where the really dark shadows are, where the light can't reach. And then right here at the bottom of the lamp and the top here, and a tiny bit right here. It gives the painting a little more drama, doesn't it? It's a little bit more clear where the shadows are. And also, I think, clears up where the eye should look, because dark and light goes right here. Maybe right here, there's not so much of an idea of where to really start looking. Maybe some of you guys even looked down here and then went up. So, if I had taken a photo of this, and this were in color, it might be more apparent to me that I could go a level darker, right? And because it'd be pretty hard to lighten up some of this, the way for me to darken it would be to do this. Again, nothing wrong with this one, but I think I would probably, I think most of us would agree this is an improved version of this. Again, nothing wrong with this. Maybe you don't want the drama. Maybe there's a certain mood you're trying to convey, but just taken purely out of context and without any intention, this one is, I think, a more compelling representation. So you guys see why it's important to not be so afraid of the darks. It is always that question of, should I keep going or not? And if it's out of fear, if the answer is I'm scared to do another level, well, then you just need to do it because it's just paper and paint and you can always start over. if you don't know if you should add a dark because you don't know if it will change the mood of your painting, that's a different story. That's a personal artistic choice to make, right? Hillary?
I'm muted.
Okay.
I have a question about adding value. So my problem is, where do you add the value to best maximize the contrast?
Mm-hmm. So I think that's a great question. So what you want to do is, first of all, think about the notan, think about Monet's notan, and think about where do you want the viewer to be looking, especially where do you want the eye of the viewer to be drawn to first. And that's a great place to think about where to add the darks. It doesn't necessarily mean that has to be the place, but it's a good place to start thinking about it because it's the area of greatest contrast. And if you're at the end point of the painting, the best way to add contrast is to add a dark. The second would be to lighten something up that has maybe too much value in it at that point. So that's one way to start. Another is to think about where the light source is. So have you created enough shadow, both in the form of the objects and also in the cast shadows? Okay. And then the third thing I think about is the depth perception in the painting. So if I'm doing anything with a lot of depth in it, like landscape, for example, then I think that there's a fairly easy rule that can be broken many times, but is helpful to think about, is that use your darks in the foreground and then use fewer darks in the middle ground and then the least amount of darks in the background. It's not a hard and fast rule, but it is that follows that kind of guide of atmospheric perspective. So more darks and more detail in the foreground. The middle ground is kind of a, that middle zone where there's fewer darks. And then in the background is lighter and very few details because you can't see them with the unaided eye that way. So those are the three things I think to myself when I'm thinking about, do I need more darks in my painting? That's a great question.
That's very helpful right now.
Oh, good.
Thank you.
We're going to use
I'm
that.
thinking about that painting I did for our class. I'm like, what is wrong with this painting? And now I know.
Now you know. And take
Okay.
a picture of it. Turn that picture into black and white. And by the way, you guys, you can also not just turn that picture into black and white, but you can also change the contrast on that picture. So we all have different tools. I know for iPhone, I like to use this tool in the middle, and this is called adjust. And if you slide all the way down, you can adjust contrast. And so you can make any painting essentially a notan by adjusting the contrast to 100% on this scale.
Okay.
And then you make it the grayscale. Yeah, let me pin it. So there you go. So that's it in a full grayscale with little contrast, and that's it with full contrast. So that's another thing. You don't necessarily need the notanizer, although the notanizer does it more quickly and easily for you, but you can play around with contrast. You can also play with the shadow button. So shadow button will darken it even more or lighten it even more. And then also the exposure button. The exposure button, you can also change the contrast in it as well. So for example, if you're playing with those things and you're finding that you like that black and white photo you just took way better when you adjusted it a lot, that means your painting's not working. Because you shouldn't have to adjust it too much. Does that make sense? Okay. Marcia, you had a question?
Thanks.
No, I was just going to add, you were talking about not being afraid of it's just paper. I like to remember that Georgia O'Keeffe burned 90% of her paintings. And when I finish something on both sides and I don't like either, I throw them in the recycling and say, I'm Georgia O'Keeffe in it.
That's awesome. I'm going to use that. Yeah, I like to think about, I watched a glass blowing show and they have to break 90% of what they make. They have to, because glass, that's just how it is. And if you want to start again, if you mess something up and you want to start again, you literally, unless it broke on its own, you have to break it to get it off that blow tube, which I don't know the name of that thing, but you have to get it off of there. Otherwise you can't start again. And that's how you learn, to start over again and just let things slide off. You want to learn about failure, take up glass blowing if you want to be better with failure. you know, or less of a perfectionist. But I think watercolor is a good enough challenge to my perfectionism tendencies at the moment. So I'm not taking up glass blowing, but yeah, I do actually like to share with you guys on occasion things that didn't work out, because they're not all winners, you know, and we're tricked by YouTube and Instagram and things like that, because people only show their best work and they don't often show you the other 9 pieces, the other 9 attempts that they ripped up and or use the other side of or whatever. So yeah, good point. All right, let's go back to the PowerPoint. I promise we're going to sketch in just a bit. So we talked about that. We talked about the apps. So let's just talk about doing an actual value study. So a value study is just a pre-painting or pre-drawing that allows you to assign values to the different compositional elements in your painting. It allows you to decide where are your lightest lights going to be, where are your darkest darks going to be, and where are your in-betweens going to be. And when you do this, if you do it often enough, you will start seeing value in color. You will. In the beginning, you might need to take a picture of something and check out the values and make sure they correspond. But it is an acquired skill to be able to see value in color. And again, those value studies that you do if you do scales, that can help you with your regular palette. Diane told me, excuse me. Yeah, Diane, you told me you did. You did value studies, I believe, of all the colors in your regular palette, and it helped you. This was during the Ollie class. So I'm thinking I might do that too, and take a picture of my regular colors and see if I've got enough value on their own. You know, I used to never use yellow. I just didn't like it.
I changed my regular palette because of that.
Interesting. Yeah. So I think I might do that too. But I'm pretty happy with my palette. So it's just thinking about when I'm doing the painting, you know, to not let myself get, I guess, distracted by a color that I might want to use without making sure it matches up to the value in my value study that I want to achieve. So most artists do this manually. We might sketch, like you saw my sketch of a wolf or fox or whatever that is. But for example, when I go out, oh, excuse me 1 minute. My friend left her phone here last night and then the alarm just went off. So when I'm out in plein air, I might do a few sketches to see how I want to translate that picture. So as artists, we have the ability to manipulate values, just like we can manipulate the composition or change the colors. We don't have to be literal to what we're seeing in front of us. I always say, I'm not a camera. This is my interpretation. So I'll give you an example. If you look at this picture, this is Bolsa Chica, and I did 3 value studies of the same photo to decide how I wanted to paint this. So I took the photo, changed it to black and white, and then I did 3 value studies, and I did one that had more value contrast on the top of it. So there's a lot of darker darks and they're juxtaposed against the lighter lights. And then in the middle, I have one that's more of like midtones or a grayscale. I did it using browns, but sepia scale, let's call it. Not as many dark darks. And then the one on the bottom is very, very, I said less detail, but also it's very high key value. There's a lot of light colors and there's hardly any dark colors. So my little notes on here are incorrect. I wrote high key value up at the top, but really it isn't. It's just high contrast. High key value is when you use a lot of lights and you don't put a lot of darks in there. So which one do you think is truest to the photograph?
First one.
The top one. Yeah.
The top one, I think.
Definitely. Yeah. So you guys are seeing those dark darks that you see here, for example. You're seeing it here. And then you're seeing some of those darks juxtaposed against the lights here. And then I guess some detail in here. So that detail in there, those darks and lights, I've left out of the other two, right? I'm really simplified those here. So yeah, I think I'll show you what I ended up painting. I changed the composition just a little bit. Oh, let me get rid of these annotations. Change the composition slightly, but it's the same day, just a different view.
You still have one on the, oh.
We'll go back there. Yep.
No, I was going to say you still have an annotation in the black and white photo.
Oh yeah, I do. Thank you. Let me get rid of that.
I didn't know if it was going to affect your next slide.
It probably would. I think it shows up. Thank you. So I changed the view a little, but without seeing it in black and white, can you guys see if I chose a high contrast, low contrast, or in between? Can you see it in color?
Kind of in between.
Yeah,
In
I was going to say in
between.
between.
Yeah,
I'd say in between.
Let's see. Yep. It's in between. Good. So you're already starting to see the difference. That's great.
Well, this is Marcia. Doesn't that, you know, create more of a mood, you were saying, or, you know, it gives it a mistier look?
Yes, absolutely. I think it does create a mood. Just when if I use a lot of these darks against the lights, I think you have more energy. I think it is more literal also. And then when you use the midtones, I think it can give you a misty look. It doesn't always necessarily, but I think it does create more calm because there's less opposites going on, right? It's more cohesive looking. Yeah. But it's not quite as happy as the bright scheme would be. That bright scheme is really happy and sunlit looking. So yeah, it's all of those things. So you don't need to use all the values in any scale. Oh, Shelly, you have your hand up.
I did, but you kind of answered my question with this next picture. I was going to say, if you wanted to have a higher contrast, where would you put in the darks?
Where I want the viewer to look. So I'm going to start over on the left. So what I've done is I've manipulated on a notonizer just to show you the difference with the darks up there. So I would want I have to decide where I want my viewer to look. I have some choices. I love those palm trees, and they're also one of the furthest points away, but they're not all the way in the distance. So I found like that middle ground was a nice place to have the viewer look. So in this case, this would be the high contrast area, and then this would be a second area. If I had wanted this to be the focal point, the houses, and it just depends what story you want to tell and what you think personally is the most interesting thing and the most pleasing thing. It's up to you. So I could have made these palm trees lighter and made there more of a contrast on the buildings. Likewise, I could have also turned it into the foreground being the area of contrast if I wanted to, by either putting some darker darks here in the water, dark contrast, and then I could have put a little more dark here against the edges. I could have put some detail in here that isn't here. I could have put an element here like branches sticking out of the foreground. That would really give you also a depth of field. So again, yeah, it's just a personal choice, artist choice, I like to call it, of what you put where. Where would you put it?
I don't know. And so that's the thing is, you know, adding darks, you could probably add too many.
Oh yeah.
What happens if you add too many? Then you're
I think there's too many
everywhere.
in this picture. Yeah. If there's too many darks, first of all, your painting will get too dark. It might get darker than you want it to be, period. Yeah. So that's a problem with trying to make up for having decided your values ahead of time and being decisive about it, is that you may feel you need to make up for it with detail. Then the detail that you add might not only change the value, but it might really change it too much, you know, because when you add detail, it also will add value in many cases because you're layering on top, right? So it's not just becoming busy or becoming a focal point because it's detail, but you're actually adding value through those details. So it could be too much. I think the one on the left is too much, but that's a manipulated version. That's not the version that I ended up with. This is the version that I ended up with, is this. Let me go back to it, right?
Yeah.
So you can run that risk. Yeah, I have a friend who always says to me, I'll show him a painting and he says, I like it, but it needs more darks. And I say, no, it doesn't. Because he likes to have more darks in his painting, and I like to keep my paintings bright and airy for the most part. And so for me, as long as the values are correct in relation to each other, and that's why value is always relative. Like for me, this painting on the right works. Even though it's super, super a lightened version, it's a high key version, it does work because there's still enough value differentiation. The darks that are at the base of the land masses still tell me that these are three-dimensional banks here, you know? Right. There's enough that's grounding it that I can still say this is a landscape, not just a bunch of squiggles, you know? So I hope that answers your question. I'm not sure if I did. So again, you can use value to create your shadows. So we don't want to forget about shadows. Cast shadows and core shadows will create form. So when you're doing objects, for example, and even this landmass here is considered an object, right? But when you're thinking more literally about like vignettes and three-dimensional objects, you want to have shadows that form core shadows so that you have some shape. The objects seem 3D, but then also cast shadows are important. So if you look at this picture, I use this as an example because there are a lot of bright colors, but there's still enough of a value contrast that you guys know that there are cast shadows happening and that there's some form to these, even though there are slightly flattened forms of the cacti. You've got those cast shadows really helping. And then the same with this, which Marcia mentioned before. You can still, the black and white one can stand alone and you know where to look. The areas of contrast are very clear in here. Okay. Note about shadow is that the shadows should be darker value than the object that's casting that shadow, okay? We make that mistake a lot of the time. Shelley, you were telling me about that you're afraid sometimes of how dark to go with your shadows. It's important to keep shadows transparent. Shadows are almost always still transparent. So don't just blob on the paint and make them real thick. You should still see, for the most part, what is underneath them, especially if it's a light surface underneath them. So shadows should still be transparent, but they should be a shade darker than the object that's throwing the shadow. Keep that in mind. And that's the hardest thing to do, I think, in painting, is to get that value of the shadow correct. Because we all think about what color the shadow could be. Everybody asks me, what color should my shadow be? I don't think it matters as much what the color of the shadow is. I think the value of the shadow is more important because you want to get that color in, get that paint down, and just once. Because once you start fiddling with it, you say, oh, I didn't make it dark enough, for example. Then what happens is it becomes opaque. It starts becoming more opaque. You really run that risk, especially if you're layering on a color that already was quite dark and opaque to make a shadow, like a Payne's gray or something like that. So try to get the value of the shadow right the first time, or when it's still wet, then you can sort of drop in color. And that way you still keep the shadow nice and light and transparent and fresh. Okay, so we already sort of talked about this, but I just want to show one more example, and then we can do a value study of this. So we've got time to do a couple of value studies. So this is a true photo that I took, and then I'm manipulating. So I'm manipulating this photo right here to show it in sepia without any contrast adjustment. So what do you guys see when you look at this manipulated photo? Anybody have any thoughts on the values that are here as is? Raise your hand. Shelly, and then Ginny.
Sorry.
That's
No.
okay.
I
Shelly.
was going to say the rooftop is not a big enough contrast to the tree behind it for me. Doesn't make it stand out.
Yeah. Do you agree with that, Ginny?
– Yeah, I agree.
I do too. So there's a couple ways you could solve this. So if you weren't in the classes, if you didn't realize that you can change things from a photo, you might think to yourself that the color contrast was enough, that the viewers would realize that this was a tree back there and not like a fluffy roof, right? But a more sophisticated artist who knows a little better could do a few different things. So you could move the tree, correct? You could move it. It doesn't have to be right there. You could literally also change just where you're standing and take the photo from a different angle. Or if it's already a photo that's taken and you're a good enough sketcher, you can change the angle just yourself. You just change the angle of the house to be a different angle, and that tree won't be right on top of it, overlapping it anymore. But let's say you like the angle of the house. All you have to do is just change where the tree placement is. You just move it to the left or remove it altogether. Then that can help you. If you kind of like the overlapping of shapes, then you could change the value of one or the other. So you could change the value of the trees in the background, or you could change the value of the roof. That's up to you. So I've done it no-tenized. And like this, if you weren't able to see what Shelly and Ginny saw, that the roof and the tree are pretty close, then look at it no-tenized. Look at it pushed as far as it can go. They are essentially this, like, what are you even looking at? It's essentially the same color, okay? So here's two different examples where I didn't change the composition, but I left the roof and the tree about the same. And then in the bottom one, I changed the value a little bit, just a little, maybe not enough for you. But I also added value here to the front of the shed so that it's in the shade in the second one. Do you guys see that? Another thing you might notice here, and I want to point out, is I simplified the values right here in the background. So see how there's a light hedge and then there's a darker landscape in the background? They're literally almost the same in the photo. So I just connected them here. So when you have shapes that are almost the same value, one way to simplify things is to just connect those shapes and just create one value with them. So if I still wanted some variety, I could sort of have mingled colors here where the colors were slightly changing, but the values of those colors are about the same. It just makes it easier to know what you're looking at. So looking at the top and then looking at that bottom shape, isn't that bottom one just easier to look at?
Yeah.
I mean, does it really matter that there are two layers of background right like that? I'm not so sure. The other thing I did was I took out this dark right here. Oh, let me annotate it again. This dark right here. I think it was distracting. I want everybody to be looking at the building, most specifically this part. So by having that random dark in the front, I think it was too confusing. So you can change things up, all the different elements in the same way that you can move elements when we're working with composition. So do you guys want to go ahead and sketch this one on our own, or do you want to start fresh with this little bowl of strawberries that I've given us? What do you guys think? Should I take a vote?
I'm an either or. This is Marcia.
Yeah.
I don't care.
I don't care either.
Okay, so let's do the
You
strawberries
choose.
first, and then if we have time, we'll do the shed, and we'll see how the different artists interpret it differently, both of these. Okay. So do you guys want to do a screen grab of this, or I could leave it up here?
Just leave it up there.
Just leave it up. Okay. So for those of you guys who are having trouble seeing this in color, we're not going to be using color unless you want to. You could use color today, but I won't. But here it is in one color. Okay. So this is still sitting in the middle of the value scale, you guys, right? And again, that's why I like this value finder here, because you can look, if you're somebody who likes to paint darker and likes darker paintings, you can use this side. If you prefer lighter and brighter paintings, like I call them my happier paintings, I prefer to use more of this side. If you like to use values that are in the middle, you're really much more like here. And that's why so I'm taking out the black and the white. I'm in the grayscale. That's what you're looking at with the strawberries. You don't have a lot of that. I don't really see hardly any white of the paper, right? You're looking at this. So that's why I like this one. I said there's a reason why this one is organized this way rather than a straight row, is because you can say, I want to do a high key painting. I want to do a mid-tones range. So you might interpret this differently than I do. So you guys want me to leave it sitting on the grayscale or on the color?
There.
Great.
Yeah.
Okay. So when you're doing a sketch of this, it's not that important to get the sketch right, perfectly right. It really isn't. Don't worry so much about drawing skills. Just like when I do my compositional sketch, Jenny, I think it was you who said, you don't really draw it and worry about your drawing. I don't. I worry more about, I'll just put in general shapes and then I can assign values to those shapes. If there is a specific shape in there that's going to play like a leading role in value, then I might capture that. So for example, if there was a stem on one of these strawberries, I'll just point it out that I really like how light it is and I like the shape of it. And that's like where I want you to look first. Then might make sure that I draw that properly. So there are some really good things about this photograph. There's a strong forward light source, right? That's nice. That's helpful. And then there are shapes that have clear form to them. So when I do my value studies, I don't always work from dark to light like I do in my painting. Sometimes I do, and I do what Marcia was talking about, which is layering, but I don't always do that. Sometimes I get my darks in first. So how many of us here regularly do value studies before they do paintings?
Rarely.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Never.
Never.
Never. I've never even.
Is it
I'm
just
learning.
Yeah. Is it just a time issue?
For me, it's I become passionate. This is Marcia again. I become passionate about what I'm drawing or painting, and I just want to do it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly. I feel ya, because I'm the same way. Just want to get to it.
Yeah, until I took your first value study class, I thought haiku. I thought you were saying haiku instead of
Haiku
the
value.
high value. High value. I was thinking, oh, that must be a Japanese term.
That's great.
Jenny, I did too.
Oh gosh.
So we talk about high key when it comes to
high key
colors. Like a lot of us know high key colors are going to be your bright, sort of straight out of the tube, happy colors. So we talk about high key colors, but when we talk about high key values, I think we talk about those a little bit less. High key values are, though, also are the ones that are brighter and lighter and have less dark in them. It is so tempting, especially when we don't have a lot of time, to just get straight to painting, you know, just get straight to it. But if you want to take your paintings to the next level, a great way to do that is to do value studies. Just start painting in one color. Do it for a week. You don't have to do it forever. Just do it for a week, and then you can say to yourself, am I already adept with values? And I just didn't know it, you know, because for some people it's intrinsic. So am I already good with them and I'm doing a good enough job? Or do you notice a difference in your paintings when you start doing a black and white version of them? And I'm telling you, it's not going to be because they're more striking, you know? So a lot of people are like, oh, well, it's just that it's more striking in black and white. That's not true. It's just that with color taken out of the equation, you're thinking more about all the other elements. And imagine it's like be if you were a blind person, you know, where your other senses are heightened.
So are you saying in the value study and you're doing the sketch and you're putting in the values, which I think are the dark and the light, is that so that when you start the painting, you have that contrast?
Yeah,
you know where that contrast is.
Yeah, exactly. So it's kind of like how you might do a sketch before you do an actual painting. So I'm starting in here with where my light values are going to be. Oh, let me spotlight myself, Valley. So I've already kind of said to myself, these are going to be the values I use. So I've got very lights and I'm going towards a little bit warmer. And I started to put in, I want to make sure that strawberry back there is a little darker, right? So I've just started, and I've got the white of the paper where I'm going to leave things alone. So it's just a bit of a roadmap to me. When I do the colors, what I'm going to make sure to do is that where that darkest dark, wherever I put it, that it's the same value as this. So if I want to use a red, it has to be a brick red to make that mark, right? If it were the green of the bowl, it has to be a very dark green. I'm probably going to have to add some sort of darker color like an indigo or a black or a gray to it to achieve that color. Okay. So that's all this is. It's just a roadmap for that.
Got it. Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. Let me put that back on. Wrong one. That one.
Oh, that was a strong.
So a lot of the time, and if you guys take my Ollie class, we do composition studies. And then we add, oh, somebody's here. We do composition studies. And then we add value on top. So we'll do a value study with our composition. And often with a compositional study, it's just a line drawing. And then we are shading it to do our value study. And then the third thing that we do is we pick a color palette. So we may do some color studies. So when you get to that last step of doing the color studies, those color studies ought to match up to the values that you've already decided you were going to use. Otherwise, you run the risk of going too dark, too light, not enough contrast, changing the mood of what you originally decided you wanted your painting to be. I'm not sure who is talking. Hi, Carol. Was it just background noise or was somebody saying something?
I think it's the person who comes across muddled. Is that Monica?
Yeah.
I'm not sure. Yeah. I think somebody had to leave. Oh, okay. I missed them. So just like in your regular painting, you have to be careful when you are layering values. Because if you're layering the values, you have to remember there's a value underneath that you've already achieved, right? And that, again, that's a risk of our watercolor painting. And that's why these value studies can be very helpful. Because you may, you layer two of your lightest values and all of a sudden you have a darker value. Has that happened to people? Or you layer two colors in a painting and then all of a sudden it's a lot darker than you thought it was going to be, regardless of color. You're like, oh, I didn't mean that to go so dark. Yeah.
This is Vicky. Did you put your mid-tone in first?
I put the lightest one in first, actually. But you can do your mid-tone first. That's helpful for a lot of people. I'll show you what I did in the little squares. I put the lightest first, and now I'm adding my midtones. If you've ever worked in oils, generally an oil painter puts down their background color and then they lay their darks in first, right? Especially like a portrait painter, for example, they'll lay their darks in and they push those darks around and then they add whites to them to break them up and so forth. Very different than when you're working in watercolor and you can't push too much around on the paper. So I picked kind of a complicated one, didn't I? Might not have time for that second one.
This is Marcia again. It looks like I could do some negative painting here too. Like, you know, the dark strawberry and then the leaf, the lighter leaf.
Absolutely. It'll really make those leaves pop to do that. I find the value study also can just give me a roadmap for how I'm going to approach my painting. While I'm thinking about things like that, Marcia. Like, how am I going to, what technique might I use, or what might I tackle first and then second?
Or how can I fix the mistake I already made?
Yeah, exactly. That's a good one. It's always a good one to have that one. I'm curious to see if anybody is really pushing their values. Can't wait to see.
What do you mean pushing your values?
Like I said, this one has a real mid-tone range, but that's not to say that you might not want to achieve it differently. So you might want it to be more like a note 10, more black and white than what you actually see here. Artist choice, right?
I see. Can you color over, can you paint over this black and white, this sketch?
Yes, it's interesting that you say that. Yeah.
I mean, that's not the point of this, but that is kind of why we do the
Is
sketch
that you,
before we
Valley?
do the
That's such a
painting.
good question, Valley.
Yes, I'm sorry, that's Valley. Yeah.
No,
yeah.
I just want to know. That's a great question. Yes, you can. And in fact, there are some artists who teach how to paint that way. That's how they teach. So I used to do a pet portrait class where that's how I taught people how to paint. A pet portrait was to do all the darker value or shadow shapes, as I called them in the class, how to do those first. And then there's an artist, I'm trying to think, it's not Brenda Swenson, but there's somebody who is doing a lot of ads on Instagram lately. And her ads are all about, she's showing you how to do plein air painting, and she uses a bright blue, like a cobalt, to do all of the shadows. And she does them first. Anybody knew who I'm talking about? Because I don't remember who, and I wish I did. But so, yeah, the answer is yes. You absolutely can.
Because this is Valley again, because then you have to start all over. that's the thing. So then you have to start all over. Okay.
Yeah, but the thing is that a lot of artists paint multiple versions of the same thing.
Yes.
And once you've painted it once, at least, yeah, you have to start over. But you know that when you do it over, it's going to end up, you just have to do it once, hopefully.
Well, you're so prolific. It's like, you know, I'm not there.
Not everybody.
I can't paint that.
Yeah. Well, you can.
Just can't paint that fast. I can't. Well, it takes me longer.
Yeah, I totally understand. But again, you'll end up with more paintings that come out successfully, which I think is worth it.
And I have a friend who always says, you know, paint it 5 times. But I have to say, after I've painted something once or twice, I get bored with it.
You lose interest in it.
Me too.
Yeah, me too. Sometimes it happens to me too. So we've got a couple more minutes and then we're going to stop and we'll have some share time. So it's difficult when you think about it like this, right? Because you're like, I'm trying to get the forms of all the subjects and the light source and know where my focal point is and make it an interesting painting. It's a lot of stuff to think about. You guys need a couple more minutes?
Okay.
No.
No.
Okay. Should have finished mine before I asked that.
And can you spell the app that I need to do for No
Yeah,
Temp?
of course. Let me turn this off for a quick sec. Oh, Carol, no worries. You did not interrupt anything. And this will be posted so everybody can review this on YouTube at your own leisure if you want to. I'm just finishing mine up. I didn't get to put the background in there.
Yeah.
I didn't put the background in.
Yeah, I didn't not have time for that. But I'm almost done, I think. I got the line of my tabletop incorrect too. You guys will have to forgive me.
Oh, I didn't even.
So, I barely did that, but I'll show you guys where I am, and then we can do some sharing. So I also wanted to show you something. So I'm on my way. Not 100% done, but and I didn't blend enough because I was doing some other things, but I'll get with the blending the forms a little better. But what I did struggle with, because I wasn't using a small enough brush or a big enough piece of paper, was I struggled with getting the highlights on anything but the gold. So I wanted to I did that on purpose because I wanted to show you guys that you can use a Posca pen to bring those highlights back really easily, really brightly. So I'll show you that. And so if you lose your highlights in a painting, you can also use the Posca pen if you like, but using this is pretty helpful because just as a roadmap, it'll help you get those little bits of brights back into. Can you see where I'm sort of just putting them back in there on the top here?
This is Valley again. What kind of pen is those? Posca?
Posca. Yeah, it's a Posca pen.
P-A-S-K-A?
P-O-S-C-A. Yeah.
And that's a highlight pen?
Yeah, it's a highlight pen. So it can help you just bring a little bit of touches of whites back. And that way you'll remember to do them when you're using this as your roadmap. So a lot of artists will not look at their photo once they've done a value study. They will only use their value study. Can you see? And I need some highlights here. Also, the whites of the seeds, those are really white. And, you know, you could reserve those, for example, if you're doing those in the real painting. But here in this, it's easier, just put a few dots into, see those right there? Put a few of those in there. And then I'm like, oh yeah, I've got to remember that. Let me get rid of that. So a lot of artists will not look back at their color reference once they've done a value study. They know what colors they're going to be using, and they don't care so much about replicating colors or color matching. Not important to them. Values are what's important. And I mean, a lot of artists, Andy Evenson, Don Croteets, just like I could rattle them off, they do not look back at their color reference. They only use the value reference going forward. So I kind of screwed it up over here, but if you take that away, I think it's fairly successful. Maybe you need a slight more dark right in the back here so that this recedes back again into the foreground. And it's that contrast right there that I think is so nice, right in the center. And then I love these two little guys down here too. So you guys are still painting. Is there anybody who is done? Diane, you want to share? Oh, you're muted.
It's really awful. And I kept starting over again.
Hi there.
You don't have to share if you don't want to.
Well, I actually started it with pencil.
Okay, let's see.
And that's my best one, was the pencil.
Oh, that's nice.
I guess
light and bright. That one really good.
I just couldn't get it.
But
I think I have
what it is. I mean,
you can.
Yeah, hold it up, because let's share. It doesn't have to be a great drawing, but you've got, like, I can feel the texture in the bowl, the shape of the bowl, and I know what it is from looking at it. I'm not confused about what it is.
Okay,
that's great.
I tried some, and then I thought, well, I'll just go and do a general wash.
Yeah, a general one, and that can help too, especially when there's a lot of like shapes within a shape. So
yeah.
Thank you for sharing that. I'm going to go to Joyce and then Sarah. Thanks, Joyce. How'd you do?
Nice.
Wow, that's very nice.
Really good. Yep, those strawberries really pop from the bowl. So yours is more of a focus on the berries than the bowl itself, which is kind of neat. Yeah. More value contrast in the berries. Yeah, thanks, Joyce. Sarah, I'm going to come to you. I just lost you, Sarah. Hold on.
Oh, Sarah.
It's so weird when that happens on my thing. Sarah.
It's holding it up.
I know, but every time somebody talks, it screws it up. So
I raised my hand again.
There you go. No, I know it's not that. It's okay. That's great, Sarah. Thank you. I
used my Tombow grayscale brushes.
Yeah, it really works.
Well, nice. I didn't. It gave me a sense of.
I think you could get a little more form in the strawberries if you work on it a little longer. A little more shape to them so when you're shaping and you're using value, you're following the shape of the form. So you're trying to create, like, again, you're taking something that is 3D, and through shading it in a curved way, you're making it two-dimensionally on the paper appear to be three-dimensional. Very good. Okay, so Vicky, and then I see Ginny, and thank you for sharing, Sarah.
Sure.
That's great, Vicky.
Oh, that's pretty.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's really nice what's in shadow and then what's further behind. It's really obvious what's further in the background.
Thank you.
It looks like you've been doing this forever, Vicky. Okay, and Ginny and then Hillary.
Good.
Oh, Ginny, it's nice.
Ooh,
Very
Ginny.
good. Wow.
That's
Excellent.
really high contrast, Ginny. You did not use a lot of midtone.
No, I already, when you dilute the Payne's gray, forget it.
But I like the contrast. That's really nice. Thank you. Okay, Hillary. Let's come to Hillary.
I like my
Oh, that came
bowl.
out great.
Ooh, Hillary.
Wow.
But I don't know what these are. They don't. I just,
They look like strawberries.
They look
oh,
like a
thank
bowl
you,
of
Jenny.
strawberry. That was really successful.
Yeah.
Really successful.
Oh,
Very
thank
nice.
you.
Yeah.
See, I want to add more detail, but I shouldn't. That's where I need to stop.
But I mean, I think that's the
Like
last step. Like if you, for example, you've got the spots on the strawberry that's on the ground, on the tabletop.
Right.
So my eye immediately went there first because all the values are true. That's what they're called when you get them correct to your photo. They're called true. True values is the term we use. So your values are true. Like I don't need any color to know what that is. And I know where to look first because you have the detail only on the ones in the foreground, the ones that are closer to us. I mean, it's not like there's an extreme depth of field, but it's your choice to say, I'm going to put the detail on these and the other ones will be less of the superstars in the painting, right?
Okay, that makes sense.
It's really
I tried
nice.
to add more contrast in here, but anyway, thank you.
Yeah, there's enough. And I mean, there's other ways to do it too, right? So you've got, can you hold it again and share? You've got the spots on the front, the ones in the front, right? On the ones that are up in the bowl, you've gotten their shapes really well. But if you wanted to hint at the seeds, you could do those using a negative painting technique. So you could paint around a circle instead of painting a dot in a darker color. Does that make sense?
Okay.
So you can make the seeds a light value, a high value, whereas the ones in the foreground are a dark value. And that just gives you, it tells the viewer to look at it in a different way.
Okay.
Different ways of doing things. Yeah.
Thank
Really
you.
nice. You're welcome. It's really great. Does anybody else want to share or you have any thoughts? I hope everybody found this to be a helpful seminar. Value is one of the hardest things. Valley, do you want to share?
Sure, and I think I don't have the whole. Yeah, it's too light in general. You can't even see it.
Hold it back towards your head. Hold it towards your head.
Lift it higher. There you go.
Lift it higher. Yeah,
Okay.
there you go.
There you go.
Oh no, that's beautiful.
Yeah, that's a really
You
nice
did a nice
drawing,
job.
But there's no value in it. There's no values in it.
Yeah, it looks like a sketch right now. So in terms of, take a look at where the shadows are, squint your eyes, and maybe start with the shadows rather than detail.
Okay,
it's a great
thank you.
start. You're welcome. Yeah, Marcia, coming to you.
Mine looks more like the water glass that I had at my brother's house for Thanksgiving. It doesn't look like the bowl, but it kind of is the, it looks more almost like a glass.
Yeah, you have the proportions wrong. It's squatter.
Yeah,
it's tall in your picture.
It's not the first time in my life I've gotten the proportions wrong.
But the technique and the values are beautiful.
Yeah, I really like the way the looking at some of the different values, it doesn't look like strawberries necessarily, but I think I got what you were talking about. But yeah, I did the proportions wrong, but it's okay. I mean, it turned out nicer than I thought it would be.
So it's an abstracted way of interpreting it, but it doesn't have to look like we all drew it to look specifically like strawberries. It doesn't need to. You could have left it more open to the viewer. But do you think that by doing this value study, you learned something? Whereas then if you went and you did paint it in color, you would learn a few things. Like you would have maybe I'll change a proportion.
Proportions,
Maybe you'll keep some of that technique.
Or I might say I really liked the way this looks like a glass, but then I would have the strawberries reflected through the glass. You'd see the red. Something like that. I'm making a birthday card for a girlfriend. I thought, perfect subject.
Oh yeah, it's cute.
She gardens a lot, so I thought, maybe I'll do this.
So there's a value to doing the value study, even when you make mistakes while you're doing it, for sure. Yeah. Thank you for sharing. I see Christine. I'm going to add you here, Christine. Take myself away.
This is very open to interpretation here. It's just very.
That is the purest value study I've seen. I love it. So that would be considered a high key value. You don't have a lot of darks, and nor is there a ton of contrast. It's so soft and pretty, like it gives a real mood to it. But I knew exactly what it was. Didn't everybody know by looking at it? Yeah. Not because we know, but we know it looks like that. Great. No, thank you for sharing. Yeah, it's interesting to see how everybody interprets the different, their own way, the same subject in different ways. And that's why I love the happy hour on Fridays. And that's why I love the sharing aspects of these, because we are all learning from each other. So thank you to everyone for being so
Thank you. Thank you very much.
I really appreciate it. You're welcome. Yeah.
Have a good rest of the day.
Thank you, Anne.
I'll give you you're welcome. A preview for next month. So next month's live draw is going to be line and shape. That's what we're going to be talking about. Okay.
Bye-bye.
So for those of you who struggle with drawing skills, you will love this one.
Oh, good.
Great. Thank you. Can't wait.
You're welcome. Thank you, everybody.
Sunday.
Thanks for coming.
Thank you. Bye, sweetie.
Bye.